In this session, we're going to look at the various techniques for checking out just parts of the repository. First of all, let's take a look at the contents of the trunk many-ders directory. Here, we're going to use the ls command that we encountered earlier with a depth of infinity to ensure that we list all of the contents recursively down through the directory structure. The output of the command shows quite clearly that there are a lot of directories, subdirectories, and plenty of folders populating the many-ders directory. Okay, if you're not already in the Subversion Guru working copy area, then change to that directory now. In this example, we're going to use the depth option to control the files that are checked out. Specifically, we're going to use the depth equals files option, which limits the command to checking out only the files that are under the specified URL. As with all checkout commands, the next thing we provide is the URL that we want to check out, in this case trunk many-ders. Recall that the ls command that we just did shows that the many-ders contains many directories and subdirectories. In order to keep each of these examples separate for comparison, we're going to check out to the many-ders files subdirectory of the working copy area. This directory doesn't exist at the moment, but will be created as part of the checkout. So in this checkout command, we're asking for the trunk many-ders directory to be checked out to the many-ders files area, but the depth command will limit that checkout to only the files immediately contained within the many-ders directory. Notice that the results of this checkout are that only the files file1.txt and file2.txt are checked out into the working copy directory many-ders files. The directories clearly shown in the blue repository area on the right, dir1, dir2, dir3, are not actually checked out. This is because that the depth files option limits us to only checking out the files, and since directory 1, directory 2 and directory 3 are directories, they're not checked out. It's worth noting at this point that this working copy directory that we've just checked out is in fact a complete working copy. Any attempts to update it or to modify it will be treated as correct modifications to the working copy. We don't need to worry about the fact that some of it's actually missing. We'll cover this in more detail later in the course. Just very quickly, we'll go through the file manager and take a quick look at the file system. You'll notice that we've got exactly what you'd expect. The many-ders files directory contains just the files that we checked out and the .svn meta directory that's required in order for Subversion client to see this as a working copy directory. Okay, let's move on to our next example. In this example, we're going to use the depth immediates. Now, when we specify depth immediates, we're asking that the Subversion client should check out the URL specified. Again, we're going to use trunk many-ders. But this time, we want the files and the directories to be checked out. So we will expect to see file 1, file 2, and directories 1, 2, and 3 all being checked out. However, because we've specified immediates, we don't expect the command to recurse into any of the subdirectories. As before, we're going to specify the many-ders immediates directory in order that we can create several working areas for comparison. In this case, as the command operates, you can see that many-ders immediates is created and, as we expected, file1.txt, file2.txt, and dir1, dir2, and dir3 are all added into the working copy directory. However, it's worth noting again that dir1, dir2, and dir3 are not further investigated. The depth immediates means that we limit it to only those elements which are immediately contained within the many-ders directory, which we specified as the URL on the command line of the checkout. As with the previous example, we can use the file manager to have a quick look inside the many-ders immediates folder, and you can see that we've got file 1, file 2, exactly as we'd expect. And investigating further into the directories dir1, dir2, and so on, you'll see that they're empty and contain only the .svn meta directory. That's because dir1, dir2, and dir3 have been checked out and are legitimate working copies. They simply don't have any content. Any attempts to update or manipulate these directories will result in the empty directory again, even though in the repository they actually contain files and folders. This will be gone into in more detail later when we talk about how to add to these partial checkouts. But for now, just appreciate that the -depth option just checks out those elements which appear immediately under the many-ders directory within the repository. In this example, we're going to check out using a depth of empty. Now, empty is a little bit of an odd option. Empty will check out just the many-ders directory and nothing else. What we'll end up with is a legitimate working copy created under the many-ders empty directory, the path specified at the end of the checkout command, which will function in exactly the same way as any other working copy directory. It will simply have no content. We won't check out any files or any directories. This may seem like a very curious example. Why on earth would you want to check out a directory and have no contents in it? To see the usefulness of the empty depth when doing a checkout, consider the following problem. You're working over a weak network link and you have a directory which contains several thousand large files. You've been called upon to simply add one file to this directory. Without the depth empty option, you'd have to check out the directory with the thousands of files coming with it. This could take a significant amount of time over a weaker network link. Checking out thousands of potentially large files obviously is time consuming. However, with the depth equals empty option, we can check out the directory, get a perfectly legitimate working copy. We can then schedule the addition to this directory, commit it back into the repository, adding the file into the repository, and then get rid of our working copy if we so choose. As I say, the working copy is a perfectly legitimate working copy, so you can do adds, you can do modifications, you can do deletions all within this directory, and we'll see in a moment how we can modify these partially checked out repository directories to selectively add individual files or individual directories or parts of individual directories to create a working copy tailored to our own specific needs. In this context, the depth equals empty plays a significant role. So, when this command executes, we see that we have a checked out revision 4 version of the repository that has been checked out to the many-ders empty repository. It's a perfectly legitimate working copy, but it contains none of the files or directories that are contained within many-ders in the repository. Once again, we can use the file manager to investigate the directory, and we find that we've just got the .svn directory, which identifies this as a working copy, but none of the files or folders that are within the many-ders directory within the repository have been checked out into our working copy. So we've now established two ways of limiting what is checked out into our working copy. The first technique is to specify URLs that are very specific. So rather than checking out the entire repository, for example, we can specify individual directories within the repository. So we can focus our attention onto only parts of the system that we're interested in. The other technique uses the -depth option to limit how far down a directory structure we recurse when we're checking out the working copy. So we can limit it to either empty, in other words, just check out this one single directory. We can limit it to just the files within the directory, or we can limit it to the files and directories within the repository, or we can let it have free reign, effectively specifying a depth of infinity and checking out the entire structure underneath that URL.